We'll move along with the program. Having a timber sale can mean some pretty good things for your property. There are many desired results, and this particular property had a timber sale on it just previous to the photograph. It's actually still going on during the photograph, and point is you can have excellent results from a timber sale when done properly. There's some tricks to it, and that's what today's program is all about. An introduction to some of those tricks of the timber sale process. One of the most important things, of course, in the results is to have a beautiful stand of leaf trees left behind after the loggers are done. Trees that are straight and tall and represent some of the best of each of the different species that you have on your property. Again, this is the result we're looking for after the harvest. Leaf trees that are well spaced and opened up and of the higher quality trees on the property. And these trees were marked to leave. We'll talk about that a little bit in the future in the rest of the program, but trees can be marked to cut or marked to leave. These are marked to leave, and so the timber harvest has gone on around them. It's still in process here. This photograph from the school forest up at Logan Canyon, the T.W. Daniel Experimental Forest. And this photo I use as an example of things to avoid in a timber sale process. If one picture might capture several different things, this one sort of does. I've got leftover slash piles that were never burned, even though the timber sale is several years old. The forest up here has sort of been high graded, meaning they took the best trees and just kind of left some green stuff on the hillside. It wasn't the best choices of trees to leave. They left some chemicals there on the site that never got cleaned up, noxious weeds on the site. A little bit familiar with this sale. Was up in the Soldier Summit area, and pretty sure that there was no contract involved and there was no forester involved in this timber sale process. Another picture of a high-graded stand in that same neighborhood, meaning that they took the very best trees and only left things with poor form and things that wouldn't make a decent log down at the mill. Not the way you want to do things. One more picture of a similar sort of stand, high graded, took the best, left the rest. Notice this tree here on the right, the damage done to it. Any trees left behind shouldn't be so severely damaged as this. I like to take off most trees that have much more bark missing than the size of your hand, ideally. But sometimes we can't always be so selective. More of the same. I see a lot of this, unfortunately, in Utah, and like to try to avoid it when possible. Stands that have had the best of the timber taken out, because when you do this, you've got no seed source for the future. There's no plans for replanting in a stand like this, and it's really generations and generations that it's going to take to recover, if it ever recovers from this sort of treatment. It's really unfortunate to see. And once again, I'm pretty sure that this sale had no forester involved and no contract. And when I say no contract, it kind of doesn't mean. Sometimes a timber operator will knock on your door and present a contract for your timber, and often those contracts are kind of one-sided. They're not necessarily written with you in mind or your protections in mind. So I'd be pretty careful about that result, about that sort of take on things. Really look towards having. We'll get into more into contracts here, but have your lawyer look at a contract to make sure it's one that is going to suit your needs. This landowner was shocked to come back after a week or two away from his property and see this kind of skid trail constructed across his hillside. He never expected that. Wasn't really in the contract, wasn't part of a timber harvest plan. There were none of those things in place. And so again, this program is about how to help avoid some of these errors. This landowner never expected to see this road built. There was no authorization given for it, and it was really unfortunate that the operator built a road into there the way he did. There was never any contract for it. Again, we can have positive results. Slash can be cleaned up, healthy trees remaining, no weeds left. In this one, there was a forester in place and there was a contract in place. This program, again, is about how to do things right. Following these suggestions should maximize your chances of success. In today's webcast, I'm going to cover these first 5 points of a timber sale process, considering your objectives, consulting with a professional forester, determining appropriate silvicultural practices, and identifying timber sale boundaries, and developing a harvest plan. In part 2, next week, we'll cover these last 5 points, next month. Once again on June 24th at 3 o'clock, we'll do the second part of this webcast and cover these points: developing a timber sale contract, choosing a logger, marketing your timber, administering the harvest, and completing post-harvest administration and activities. One of the first things is to consider your objectives, what you want from the property. I'd like to show this picture of this landowner, Lauren Munch, in the Thousand Peaks Ranch, because he has so many forestry objectives in his forest. Lauren was the head of the Utah Wool Growers Association for a while, so he's a sheep man by raising and by heritage, and so of course grazing is really important to them on their ranch, but they also do a little bit of harvesting, timber harvesting. I should say that I'll use the terms timber harvesting and timber sale interchangeably, and here in Utah people often call it just timbering. But Lauren has done some harvesting on his property that we've looked at together, but he has other values that he's concerned about as well. They have movie sets up on the property. They have guided skiing trips and heli-skiing and cat skiing and fly fishing and all kinds of things. At one point he asked, we were down by the river, the Weber River, the headwaters of the Weber runs through the property, and he was asking me if he thought he should be cutting some of the timber down along the river, and I said, absolutely not. If you've got guided fly fishing trips in there and that's bringing in revenue to the ranch, I think that would be a higher priority in that area, and an area to avoid with the timber sale. So what your objectives are really important to the outcome of your sale. And in Utah, family traditions and family heritage have been shown to be some of the more important things, the most important things for most forest landowners. That's why they own forest land. It's not to log, and it's not to necessarily make money from the property. It's to carry on family traditions such as recreation, grazing of cattle, and the grazing of sheep as well. People have indicated to us that these are very important parts of their family heritage, and an important reason why they own their forest land. So mixing a timber sale in with this can be a little bit of a challenge, but absolutely possible. Of course, anytime you're considering your objectives, I can't stress enough how important it is to consider how important your water resources are in your forested property. Of course, we live in the second driest state in the nation, and there is nothing probably more important coming out of our forests than our water. And a big part of doing the timber sale process well is protecting those water resources. That's a big part of what this whole program is about. The Utah Forest Landowner Education Program is helping people understand their forest resources in such a way that helps them to protect that water that's up there. It's one of the most important things. When you're considering your objectives, it's really a good idea to consider other resources in your forest, such as your forest road system. Perhaps you want some roads closed that to keep traffic off of, or you want some additional roads built to get better access for hunting or a cabin site or whatever it is. But while a timber sale is going on in your property, you're going to have a fair bit of logging equipment there and a lot of skill and knowledge, hopefully, to be able to get things like this done. So it's a good time to mix these needs and desires and get a lot done all at one time by mixing all your objectives together. Another important part of considering your objectives and early in the process is just to educate yourself. This is one of our annual timber harvest tours we've been running since 2002. You'll get postcards from me in the mail about this annually, and where we meet and talk with one another on an active timber sale, usually. This one down in the Gooseberry Cabins area outside of Fairview just this last year. Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands, Jason Johnson presenting to the crowd of about 45 interested folks. And it's a good way to just get together and kick the dirt a little bit and ask some questions and see what it's like as it's happening. And sometimes we go to ones that were recently done, and sometimes we go to ones that were done a couple of years, and we talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of them. And it's a pretty educational process for us all usually, and a really nice day in the woods. Our website is a great way to further educate yourself. A couple of things to point out here on our website. Within our reading room, you'll find our Utah Forest Facts series with lots of informative fact sheets on the timber sale process and things related to that, and we'll be talking about further in the presentation. Presentations such as today's webcast are here under presentations. Of course, the Utah Forest News has lots of information in it, but I find most often when I go to the website, even though I know it pretty well, I just go to the search options and search for what I'm looking for. Is the easiest way to hone in on specific things that you're looking for on our website. But that's our web address, extension.usu.edu/forestry, and I really recommend that you go there and spend some time and don't hesitate to combine it with calling me and asking me a couple questions if you have questions about the process. Let's see, I'm going to try to do another poll here. Let me pull up this other poll. Perhaps you could indicate to us in this poll which of these resources or which of these categories best describes you, whether you're a landowner, a resource professional, a logger, or just an interested citizen. We'd appreciate if you'd broadcast the results of that so everybody can see what's going on. And we've got 7 out of 13 folks responding to that. Thank you. We'll give you another minute for it's 8 out of 13. We really appreciate this. It helps us in future programming choices to know who's paying attention and who's learning. And we got a note from Carol. Thank you very much. And I sure hope your next timber sale goes a little bit better, Carol. And okay, we'll go ahead and close up this poll. Looks like most folks attending today, 63%, are landowners. That's great. That's who we're here to serve. But we sure like helping out resource professionals as well. Get rid of this poll. Doesn't want to close too easily today. There we go. On with the program. An important part of the whole timber sale process, and one I strongly encourage you to consider, is to have a forest management plan. It's really a way of formalizing what your objectives are and how you're going to get to your desired end result. So time to think about what you want, what's most important, whether it's wildlife or family traditions or different things that we've talked about here. These are important decisions. For a lot of people, the timber sale will be one of the biggest financial transactions of their lifetimes, and obviously the results of a timber sale, whether positive or negative, will last for a lifetime or more. So it's worth taking some time to really consider it, and I think the formal way to do that is through a forest management plan. And they often call them forest stewardship plans, especially those prepared by the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, the state foresters. This is one of the advantages of having a forester prepare a forest management plan is gives you an opportunity to sort of develop a relationship with them before you go into something as intense as the timber sale process, and to build trust and to have a better understanding of your forest property and what's possible from it, and a better understanding of the person, the forester, that may be working with you on it. Why would you go ahead and cut 100-year-old trees without a plan? We have some fact sheets, this one available on our website in a PDF form, or if that's not convenient for me, just give me a call and I'll mail you one on forest management planning to give you a little bit more information about this topic. Encourage you to go see that. I encourage you to consult with a professional forester. This again is Jason Johnson from the Richfield District with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. A time with a professional forester, whether they're a consultant or a state forester, is a time that they can explain the process to you as a landowner, and they can listen to you to find out what you want from your property, and they can sort of translate that into proper forestry terms, and it's a good way to help you get what you want out of your management activities. Some of the most important times really is early on in the process, just like this, standing on the top of the edge of the hill looking out and listening to the landowner and finding out what's important to them and what their concerns are and where they want to go with the property. A lot of the times this is just done sitting around the kitchen table, and that time again is just really valuable to both of you to understand what's going on and where you want to go with your forest property. A forester can help you do things like set up the boundaries of your property and the timber sale itself, administer the timber sale, find a logger, market the timber. All these things that we're talking about in today's and next month's webcasts, a forester is trained to help you through all of this. This is what we do as foresters. I've had the good fortune of being able to oversee a couple of dozen timber sales myself as a consulting forester in northern Idaho, and it's been a tremendous thing, I think, for myself and for the clients that I worked with, to help them better manage their forest property and get what they want out of it with less risk and less fear. This is a consulting forester that passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, from southern Utah, Paul Fulmer, but we have a couple of active consulting foresters in the state, and this is somebody that you will pay a fee to. You would either pay perhaps a flat fee for a forest management plan, or if it was a timber sale, you might pay a percentage of the proceeds of the sale. Negotiate something, and should have a contract with your consulting forester. And a consulting forester is ideal because it's somebody who is your agent, who looks out for your best interest. If it's a forester that's paid by the mill, well, then perhaps that's who they need to work for. That's not so common in Utah, but it happens sometimes. And even though there's a lot of positive from working with state foresters, can't say enough about that, but they can't work as your agent directly. like a consulting forester can, although they can do you a lot of good. And these are some of our fresh young faces, the area foresters they're called, with the state of Utah, the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. In most states with forest land, private forest land, such as Utah, has what most states call service foresters. And again, in Utah we call them area foresters. This is Morgan Mendenhall on the left from up here in the Bear River area, and Patrick Moore in the middle from the Cedar City office, and Natalie Conlon from the Moab City office, and all intelligent and hardworking young foresters ready to help you with the process of planning a timber sale or just managing your forest property. And they're there for free. I really encourage that you also use a consulting forester in the timber sale administration end of things that we'll talk about here more later in the program. But I can't say enough about all the good work that the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands foresters have done for Utah landowners. The next step is to determine the appropriate silvicultural practices. Silviculture is a word that just means the growing of trees in the forest, and foresters are trained to understand how forests grow, and really it's largely about the regeneration of the next forest is what silviculture comes down to, is how to encourage the next crop of trees to come up. And what's appropriate is hugely varies depending of course on your objectives as a landowner, but also on the ecology of the forest resource. Here we have a clear cut, which is kind of a dirty word in forestry these days, but a completely appropriate silvicultural method for reproducing aspen. This is all in an aspen harvest up on the Soapstone Basin area up Wolf Creek Pass out of Camas. And the way aspen reproduces, it does excellent with this kind of treatment. Here's area forester Jason Johnson standing out an 8-year-old aspen clear cut from that you can hardly see him anymore because the reproduction is so excellent. It's done so well, responded so well to that kind of treatment. Here's a aspen clear cut that in a way didn't work so well. It's got excellent reproduction, as you can see, that young aspen shoots growing up, but the objective here was to remove aspen. This is a ski run on so the clients, heli ski clients, can make it down to the valley bottom through the thick timber, and that's why this area was cut out. And it's not really providing that service very well because the young aspen are coming up and taking over, and it's really difficult for the clients to ski through. So it was a missed objective here. It's great to see the reproduction, but that's not really what they wanted. I think it probably could be fixed with some sheep, but got to be careful on what you're looking for. Here we talked about clear cutting, and this is a small clear cut that was up on Wolf Creek Pass, put into a spruce stand, which is completely inappropriate approach and treatment of a high elevation spruce stand. That clear cut was from over 30 years ago, and still it has not reproduced itself. And again, you got to be careful of what the resource that you're working with and what you want to get out of it. On the other hand, if you go into a spruce stand and just take a portion of the overstory out, a portion of the trees out, and leave in most cases the majority, perhaps 60% of the forest that's there, then you'll have excellent results such as this and this successful spruce harvest up Logan Canyon. And these trees were marked to leave, and they've already taken out all the surrounding trees, and so this is kind of the end result. Developing a harvest plan is an important part of the process, and sometimes your harvest plan will be part of your forest management plan, kind of built in there, but often it require an extra step to do have a harvest plan. Some of the things that a harvest plan will consider are the equipment choices of the desired logger. Here we've got variety. This is a typical skidding machine. This is a machine we drag logs with. This is a grapple hook on the back of it. It's called a rubber-tired skidder. Here, this is a processing machine. It's called a stroke delimber. It sits on a landing, and we'll talk about that more later, but it is for processing the logs. And these two pieces of equipment are called feller bunchers, and they're for cutting the trees and stacking them up. And choosing a logger that has equipment appropriate to your property and your objectives is an important part of the harvesting planning process. Here, kind of going the opposite end of the scale for a much lighter touch is horse logging. We've got a couple of horse logging operations operators operating in Utah. This in Sundance 2 years ago. And if you've only got a few acres and small timber and you like the peace and quiet and want to keep it that way and don't want things tore up at all, this can be a good choice. Another important part of the harvesting plan process is to find out where your skid trails and designate where your skid trails are going to be. This is where we drag the logs. Again, this is a rubber-tired skidder dragging a fresh load of logs into a landing. And these skid trails should be designated in advance by a forester because they're an area of fairly high impact, and you want them pretty widely spaced, but you also want the loggers to have reasonable access to the timber. Landings are the area where all the skid trails come to. It's where we drag all the logs to, and they are processed. Again, this piece of machinery is a stroke delimber. It picks up a whole tree and drags it into the landing, it drags it into it's this sort of internal casing here that and we'll remove all the limbs, and there's a couple of chainsaw heads in there, and in the cab of the machine there's a computerized readout so the operator can see exactly what length of log and diameter of log he's manufacturing, and they can produce them just the way the mill likes them, and you get better value for your wood this way often. But landings in general are an area of the highest impact. It's really important to choose your landing locations carefully. It's not only where we drag the logs to, but of course this is where the roads come into and we haul the logs out of on logging trucks such as this. So a loader will be sitting on the landing often and loading trucks, and you got skidders coming in other directions, so landings can get pretty large, and with that much compaction in the soil, they don't necessarily grow back that quickly. It's also where we pile all the slash, all the debris. So you've got this thing going on where that's where kind of the ugliest part of the sale tends to be, because that's where all the slash and debris is all accumulated and all the impact and compaction happens. But it's also the place where you drive into for years to come after the timber sale process, because that's where the roads go to and that's where they end typically and turn around. So I really encourage landowners to be careful about where their landings are and how their landings are cleaned up. A few extra bucks to pay the operator to clean up the landing well at the end of the process while that machinery is there and available, I find goes a long way towards people's end satisfaction with the timber sale process, because that pile, when it doesn't look so good in 10 or 15 years if it never gets burned and never gets taken care of. Excuse me. Another thing to consider when planning where your landings are is, in a lot of ways I like to put them out in meadows so we don't take forest land out of production. So an area that's already opened up can be good. But again, if it's a really important meadow to the family and the way you use your property, then you might consider protecting it from the landing. Road location is part of the the process of the timber harvesting plan, and it's a good idea to plan these out well in advance and think about your future needs. If you're going to have a cabin or you're going to want access to a certain part of the property, the timber sale process is a great way to get this done relatively inexpensively, but with reasonable amount of skill and expertise that's available. Loggers can be quite good at building roads. Part of the harvesting plan would be on the ground is to mark out where your boundaries are, not only the property boundaries but the sale boundaries. Anytime you start to mark property boundaries, I always recommend, you're considering having a timber sale there, one of the most important things you could do is just talk to your neighbors, let them know what you're thinking about and where you're operating, and offer to walk that line with them. Often a forester will do this on your behalf if you have a forester working for you, and I always recommend it because a lot of misunderstandings can be cleared up in advance before we have to get the stump glue out. That never really works very good. Often they're marked with fairly official signs like this, but a lot of times they're just marked with simple flagging to where you're in a straight line along the edges of the property where you can see the one from one flag to the next, and a logger who's got a chainsaw in his hand and is pretty busy can also see them. You have to make them quite obvious. I also really recommend considering breaking a large timber sale into smaller pieces with interior flag lines, and you can set up that gives a landowner and a forester a little more control over the process, especially as they're developing the relationship with their logger. Before that trust relationship is completely developed, you can set it up and build it into the contract of the sale that the logger works in area designated as A, and finishes and completely wraps up that area before he goes to area B or C or D down the line, so that not a dozen different things get started and you get to see what the end result is going to be before we go charging through the whole process. It's a pretty good way to protect yourself and be more comfortable with the process as it's going on. Again, on the ground, part of the harvesting plan would be to mark trees, either mark to cut, as in this example, and or they can be marked to leave. Depends on the aesthetics, the long-term aesthetic considerations, and just the amount of timber that's out there and how much you're taking, and it's a decision that goes back and forth and is made by the forester on the ground, whether it's better and more effective to mark to leave or mark to cut. I'd just encourage you to consider having your timber marked by a forester one way or another. It is certainly expensive, but you get a much better result. Forestry I used to work with like to say that the prescription for a forest management plan, or a forestry prescription, which is just our terms for how we're going to handle the woods and a timber harvest. The best prescriptions are written with a paint gun out on the trees, not with a word processor here in the office. The point being that a lot of the art and science of forestry comes out for a forester when he's got a paint gun or she has a paint gun in their hands and setting up a sale for you on your property, trying to relay your objectives into this medium. Just wanted to point out, part of the accounting system, when we mark a tree to cut or mark a tree to leave, we always put a stump spot on the bottom, so that of course if the contract was to mark to cut, then every stump that we see out there, or almost every one, should have a corresponding spot down at the bottom. If we start to see a lot of stumps that don't have that corresponding spot, then we know we have an issue that we need to discuss with the operator, the logger. It's just one of the several ways that we keep track of things. We'll talk about more of those in the future. Wanted to point out the Forest Water Quality Guidelines. These are some publications I helped put together about 8 years ago that help guide you for harvesting timber around water resources, give you some ideas on how far away you need to stay from the stream, and recommendations on what you can harvest within the stream protection zones. And we have two publications. One of them, the brown one, the larger one, is kind of a primer, an overview of the whole thing, and then the smaller one is a field guide for operators and loggers in the woods. And I have lots of these pubs and would be happy to share with anybody. Just give me a call, or you can again search on our website, and they're available in PDF form there. Just want to do a final reminder that for sort of heading towards wrapping up today's session, but we can have a really positive end result. This photo from just a small property, a 10-acre piece down by Cedar City up in Duck Creek, but the landowner was really careful to have the area forester from Cedar City work with him on this, and made some wise decisions on how he proceeded, and had a good contract in place, and had an excellent end result. It's a really beautiful forest, great variety of trees, and variety of heights and sizes of trees and species, and most of the trees that were left were real high quality leaf trees. It's just a beautiful forest, and did a really good job. And so I'm here to encourage you to think about doing the same if you have a timber sale on your property. It's great to come out with a positive end result from this sort of thing. I'd like to, as we wrap up today, ask you to do one more poll here. And I'm gonna this one's sort of a little bit of a quiz, asking you what are the two items that will best ensure your success in the timber sale process. Of course, all the things that I wrote down there are positive things, and it's really important to have each of these things, but I've tried to stress in particular two of the things, or one of the answers here, as being very important for this process. And we'll give folks a minute or two. I'm not broadcasting the results because I'm sort of treating this as a quiz. We'll broadcast the results here in a second, though. We have 6 out of 14 participating. Thank you. We appreciate your participation, and I want to thank you for coming to our webcast today in general. Really appreciate your time and your effort, and we will be emailing you an evaluation form here directly, and please take a few minutes to fill that out and let us know what you think about the process and what we can do to make it better, and especially what topics you'd like to see from this in the future. Today's topic came from a suggestion from one of our previous webcasts, so I'm trying to listen to it. So I'll go ahead and broadcast our results. We have 10 out of 14 people participating, and most people answered knowing your objectives and choosing appropriate silvicultural practices, which is a pretty good answer because I spent a lot of today talking about that. But I guess I used this as a way to show what the answer I was really looking for, and maybe this is all professional foresters answering this 27%, but having a professional forester and a timber sale contract are probably the two most important items that you could choose to ensure your success in the timber sale process, because if you have a good professional forester, he'll know to have a timber sale contract, or he or she will know to have a timber sale contract and know to do all the other things on the list. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. Thank you all for participating in that. And that is the end of our program today. If anybody has any questions about the timber sale process, we'll stay on here for a few more minutes. Feel free to ask any questions via chat, or of course I'm always available via phone. My phone number is 435-797-0560, and my email is darren.mcavoy@usu.edu.